And with that, finally, we got all the setup we need to animate this icon. And of course, here I still took some time to explain this, so it took us some time to build this. But of course, that's the case because you're currently learning it. If you take a look at this code, it should be easy to see that this is much less code than you had to write with the explicit animation. And that's why implicit animations often are the better choice. Now with that, let's save it and let's see whether it works though. If I go back here to Emil and I click this star, still nothing happens here. And the reason for that is that at the moment, with this code here, Flutter can't really detect whether anything changed. Because sure, I'm swapping the icon data inside of my icon, but it's technically still an icon widget and therefore an icon element that is visible on the screen. And Flutter therefore doesn't see any difference. It doesn't explore the detailed data stored in this icon. It just sees that it was an icon widget before and that it's now still an icon widget. So to make sure that Flutter is aware of this change, we should add a key to our icon here. And you learned about keys earlier in the course. They are always useful if you need to differentiate between two widgets that are of the same type, but got different data attached to them. And here we must add a key because the animated switcher will take that key into account to find out if we technically have a different widget than before, even though the type might be the same. And the key I will add here is a value key, which is favorite. And therefore it will indeed change between true and false, and Flutter will therefore see that something changed here and will then trigger this animation. So now with the key added here, if we restart this and go here, now we see an animation. And of course here we got a pretty wild animation because we're using the default animation between 0 and 1 as a turns value here. So we're in the end giving this star a full turn here, which looks rather wild. To change this, if we're not happy with this kind of animation, we could replace the animation we pass as a value 2 turns with a tween, about which you also learned before and which you can also use in the context of implicit animations, because the whole idea behind a tween really just is that it gives you more control over between which values you want to animate. And here we could then, for example, create a tween where we want to begin at 0.5 and end at 1. And then again, Flutter would take care of translating its animation between 0 and 1 to an animation between 0.5 and 1. You now just have to call animate here, because otherwise you just got a tween, and what you actually need is an animation, and animate returns such an animation. Now animate then needs a parent, and previously that was the animation controller, but in the end, an animation controller is just an animation configuration object, and the same is true for this animation here. So you can simply pass this animation here as a value to animate. Now the only remaining problem here is that by default, Dart infers this to be an animation of type num, so a mixed set of numbers, doubles and integers mixed. And one way of working around this is to set this to a double by using 1.0 instead of 1, because otherwise this is inferred as an integer. An alternative would be to take advantage of the fact that tween is actually a generic type, and by explicitly telling it that the values should be treated as doubles. So either approach works, but with that we now changed the values between which Flutter will play an animation, and if we do that, we will therefore see that now this is a bit less wild. And of course you can still change this a bit more and, for example, animate between 0.8 and 1 to reduce this effect even more. Like this. It's really up to you what you want to animate here, But with that, I think this looks quite nice, and this is how you can add an implicit animation, simply by using Animated Switcher or one of the many other animated widgets provided by Flutter. The difference between those widgets and Animated Switcher in the end mostly is that Animated Switcher only cares about the fact that you're transitioning between two values, and then you get full control over how to transition, whereas most of these other widgets are already focused on one specific kind of animation that will be played. For example, animated crossfade, which will simply fade between two different widgets instead of allowing you to decide which transition should be played. As always, it is simply best if you do dive into the documentation here as well, and you simply play around with these different widgets.